Hello everybody, my name is Professor Niamh McDade. I'm the Director of the Legal Human Research Centre for Forensic Science. It's a great pleasure to co-host this event with the law school here within the university. And my job is simply to do the welcome to our guests who will be introduced to you as we go along. I'm going to hand over to Sarah Hendry, who is from the University of Dundee Law School, to do her welcome also.
Thanks, Niamh, and it's a great pleasure to be here, to be on campus for anything, but especially for a Fold event. Fold was set up a few years ago, is that right, Graham? Pre-COVID, so it's hard to judge time, but it was set up by Graham, who will say a few words after me, and by my predecessor as head of law, Stuart Cross, who I think is in the online audience today. And one of Stuart's great missions as head of law, he taught property law, he taught e-commerce, he was a practitioner, and he really wanted Dundee Law School to have a reputation for law and technology in the broadest sense at undergraduate level and not just in terms of postgraduate degrees. And I've tried very much to foster that, and the Fold community is part of that, and Graham was the prime motivator, spent a lot of effort setting up Fold and arranging events both pre-COVID and online during COVID. And then the Leverhulme Centre and Niamh's work, and so many opportunities there for collaboration around digital evidence, around forensic evidence. And after much effort, Niamh and I secured a joint chair in law and technology, Angela, and thanks to Angela, we've been able to resurrect and continue Fold along with Graham and now in person. So I can't think of a more topical or interesting or dramatic topic to kick off more live Fold events with, and I'm sure that we'll all have a really interesting time.
Well, I'll keep it very short. My background is I'm Graham Johnston. I was a practicing lawyer for many years. I run a software company based in Dundee. And of course, the future of law is about so much more technology, and to some extent, as we'll discuss this evening, technology causes all sorts of problems and its interaction with law. But this concept of just bringing together academic perspectives, practicing legal perspectives, other sorts of real world perspectives, is looking at all that in the round, was very much the idea behind it all. Just glad, very grateful to Angela and Niamh and Sarah and others at the university for just resurrecting it all after the COVID lockdown.
Yeah, just to mention, a few people have joined that this event is being recorded. We have got a hybrid audience as well who can see everybody in the room, and there's built-in microphones to capture all the conversation going on, but that also means that the microphones might pick up on any chats that people are having in the room, so just to warn you about that. If anyone needs to use the toilet, then they're out of this room. If you come out of here and go left and through the doors and keep walking down that corridor, they're on your right hand side, and if we hear a fire alarm, we will need to exit the building, so we'll just go down the stairs that we came in. I think that's all the announcements we need to hear. Hopefully the virtual audience can hear us fine. We've sent a message in the chat so they can contact us through that, and if we've got any questions that we'll ask them in the room, everyone should be able to hear this.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Professor Angela Daly. I am based here at the University of Dundee between the Law School and the Leverhulme Research Centre for Forensic Science. A bit of a mouthful. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today as well. I'm going to be chairing this great panel that we have. And before I introduce the panelists and tell you a bit more about today, I just want to talk a little bit of an introduction about the topic of our discussion, which is the Post Office Horizon IT miscarriage of justice scandal. This is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, miscarriages of justice in UK legal history, and it's one that continues to kind of rumble on and have impact right now, and it still remains, and some aspects of it remain unresolved. At the heart of it is a malfunctioning IT system, although one could argue there are other parts of it. But we have a malfunctioning IT system that was used by the Post Office for many years, I think 2 decades, causing enormous problems in terms of incorrect accounting, leading to issues such as sub-postmasters and mistresses being accused of crimes such as false accounting. Now, my area is much more around kind of the regulation of technology, issues such as automation, AI, etc., rather than kind of accounting and so on. However, I think that in the Post Office IT Horizon scandal shows us, in some respects, the mundane problems of malfunctioning IT that can have huge impacts on people's lives, negative impacts, and also on the authority, legitimacy and trust that we have in systems such as the legal system and in other systems such as IT systems more generally, that much of our contemporary society and economy is based upon. And we trust that they function properly and function, I suppose, appropriately and truthfully. Now, this assumption is very much an assumption, as we can see in the Post Office IT Horizon IT scandal, an assumption that we should not be taking for granted at all. Why did I talk about my own area? Well, in subjects such as artificial intelligence, a lot of the discussion is really around what about these killer robots, or is humanity all going to perish as a result of bad AI or AI gone bad? I think what I said mundane about the Post Office, we're not really a scandal. Mundane in the sense of this is not kind of killer robots. This is a kind of fairly run-of-the-mill, accounting system, which nevertheless caused enormous problems to the point of kind of human damage, people dying, people losing their jobs, losing their incomes, losing their marriages even. So I think I think it's one that deserves a lot more attention, partly because it's so scandalous and so awful, and I haven't even kind of got to some of the other awful parts of it, which hopefully some of the speakers will touch on, but also because it kind of demonstrates that we don't necessarily have to be concerned. We probably should still be concerned about things like killer robots, but some of the harms and risks from technology are actually much more kind of in the here and now in systems that are being used already. And just to kind of conclude before going to the panel, I don't know if our guest Paul Marshall has anything to say about this. Don't want to put you on the spot, maybe for later, but it seems that lessons around Horizon IT are not necessarily being learned. And why did I mention Paul? Well, it seems that the court system in England and Wales is implementing another IT system that is causing some familiar problems in terms of inaccuracies, which may have very significant impacts on kind of individuals' cases. I don't know if that's one that's familiar to others. It was only brought to my attention the last week. So unfortunately, I think we need to keep our eye on these kinds of mundane yet damaging uses of IT systems, and therefore we need to learn much more about Post Office Horizon IT scandal and kind of heed some of the warnings that we see from that. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm going to introduce the panel, and just to let you know, I'm going to give each member of the panel, of which we have 4, about 5 to 7 minutes, which will be fairly strictly enforced, to give an opening statement or a statement around whatever aspect of the Post Office Horizon IT scandal they wish to talk about. Then we will have a more general opportunity for comments, questions, discussion from you online. Hope you can hear me, and also kind of the opportunity to have a dialogue too. So I hope we'll hear more from the speakers in that point. Then we will kind of finish up the formal parts, and there is plenty to eat and drink for a more informal chat. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce very briefly the panel in order of speaking. I'm going to ask firstly Paul Marshall to speak. Paul Marshall is our special guest, barrister from Cornerstone Chambers in London, who's been heavily involved in the Post Office Horizon IT proceedings. He's assisted 3 appellants in pro bono challenges in their appeals to convictions, I believe, and really looking forward to kind of hearing a bit more of an insight from him. Then I'm going to move Dr. Andrew Tickell. That's correct. Senior lecturer in law at Glasgow Caledonian University, who will give us a bit more of a Scottish legal perspective or Scottish perspective more generally, not just in law, on the Post Office Horizon IT scandal, miscarriage of justice, because I think in what has been written so far, we've seen a bit in England and Wales, not enough, but we've seen very little about how this has impacted on Scotland. And those of us who are legally inclined will know that we do have a different legal system in Scotland, so it is important to understand what the dynamics here have been as well. Then I'm going to move to our IT experts. So James Christie is an independent software testing consultant based in Perth, who has written, I think, quite a bit about Post Office IT Horizon miscarriage of justice from an IT and forensics perspective. And we're going to conclude with my colleague, Dr. Rachel Menzies, senior lecturer in computing at the University of Dundee, specialised in UX, who I think is going to give us some of her perspective on the issue as well. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Paul Marshall to give his opening statement, please.
Well, I'm under a certain amount of pressure having to say what I've got to say in no less than 7 minutes, or no more than 7 minutes. So I'll deal with this in very short form, but all of you here will no doubt be familiar with the fact that this came to public prominence in 2021. The Court of Appeal entertained no less than 42 conjoined criminal appeals, the largest number of conjoined criminal appeals in recent memory. Of those appeals, no less than 39 appeals were successful. The Court of Appeal quashed convictions for theft and false accounting in that number of cases. What's less widely known, and I think ought to be a matter of considerable concern, is that 35 of those appellants pleaded guilty to at least one offence of dishonesty. The Court of Appeal, and I won't go into the detail of the judgment, the grounds of the judgment, Court of Appeal effectively found and held that none of those appellants and convicted defendants ought to have been prosecuted. So what's going on when, by necessary implication, 35 people who are innocent of any offence are pleaded guilty in the criminal justice system to offences of that kind? Moving rapidly on. It was the Horizon system was rolled out in 1999. There were about 17,000 post office branches then, which had multiple Horizon computer terminals installed in them typically. 550 claimants eventually brought civil proceedings in group litigation, which came to an end in 2019. This is what the trial judge said of the Post Office's defence to that litigation. The approach by the Post Office to the evidence demonstrates simple institutional obstinacy or refusal to consider any possible alternatives to their view of Horizon, which was maintained regardless of the weight of the factual evidence to the contrary. That approach by the Post Office was continued, even though now there is also considerable expert evidence to the contrary as well, and much of it agreed expert evidence on the existence of numerous bugs. This approach by the Post Office has amounted in reality to bare assertions and denials that ignore what has actually occurred. It amounts to the 21st century equivalent of maintaining that the earth is flat. Famous statement. When real world examples are put together in the expert evidence that I have accepted, it can be seen that this institutional obstinacy by the Post Office amounts to little more than repeated assertions that the Horizon system cannot be to blame for the claimant's experiences, coupled with, for some, challenges to the claimant's witnesses because the Post Office simply cannot accept their factual accounts. My comment upon that is, this has been the Post Office's position on its prosecutions from 2000. Why, I ask, did it take until 2019 and vastly expensive and extensive group litigation involving 550 claimants for Mr. Justice Fraser to identify that the Post Office's evidence amounted to little more than bare assertions and denial, unsupported by factual evidence? How and why were so many convicted of offences of the utmost gravity with life-changing consequences on little more than the Post Office's say-so? I'd be tempted to provide an answer to that, but I won't for the time being. How did this play out in practice? I was going to give you more, but I'll give you a few examples. Lee Castleton was postmaster of a branch post office in Bridlington in Yorkshire. He was subject to a civil claim. It's the only reported civil judgment in England and Wales on this. For a shortfall of £26,000, keep that in mind, in 2006. He telephoned the Horizon Technical Helpline on 91 occasions, complaining about problems reconciling his Horizon accounts. At his trial, his evidence was that he believed that there was a fault in Horizon. The trial judge, His Honour Judge Havery QC, sitting as a High Court judge, held that it was for Mr. Castleton to show why the shortfalls had occurred. He represented himself as a litigant in person. He could not afford the expense of expert evidence. Without hearing any evidence from experts at all, Judge Havery accepted the Post Office's evidence and concluded that the arithmetic from the Horizon system could not be disputed. The Horizon system was working perfectly well at the material time, and that accordingly the shortfalls must have been caused by Mr. Castleton's incompetence. Virtually every finding of fact and law in that judgment, which is a reported judgment, still stands wrong. Seema Misra was prosecuted by the Post Office for shortfalls at her Post Office branch in 2010, slightly in excess of £70,000. Before and during her criminal trial in 2010, Mrs. Misra made no less than four applications for disclosure from the Post Office of Horizon records. The final application was made at the conclusion of her trial. One of the protests by Mrs. Misra's counsel was that it had not been possible for her expert witness to properly consider Horizon error records. It was submitted to the trial judge, Judge Stewart, that Mrs. Misra could not have a fair trial without further disclosure from the Post Office. 3 different judges rejected Mrs. Misra's 4 applications for disclosure from the Post Office. Judge Stewart dismissed the application made at the end of her trial, contesting that she had a fair trial. He asserted that her trial was fair, and he noted that a large amount of technical evidence had been disclosed by the Post Office. 11 years later, the Court of Appeal held that Mrs. Misra's trial was unfair. It was unfair because the Post Office had not given proper disclosure of Horizon records. Among the material not disclosed by the Post Office, very importantly at Mrs. Misra's trial, was a high-level meeting between Fujitsu and the Post Office, at which Post Office and Fujitsu management discussed a problem and a bug called the receipts and payments mismatch bug. That was a bug which caused a Post Office sub-postmaster to think that their accounts balanced at their terminal, when in fact at the Fujitsu's main servers in Bracknell in Berkshire, there would be a shortfall shown. The reason I mention that is that in Mrs. Misra's trial, the transcript of which is available online, it was said by prosecuting counsel that any problem with Horizon would be apparent to a sub-postmaster at their terminal. That was untrue. It was known by the Post Office to be untrue. I don't want at this stage to get into the technical aspects of this, but one of the great temptations in that entire Post Office saga is to confuse and elide Post Office misconduct on the one hand with ignorance and incompetence on the part of both lawyers and arguably judges on the other. The two together make it extremely complicated. Tracking forward to 2019, just giving my last instance of an extraordinary circumstance. At the Horizon technical issues litigation, the postmasters, 550 payments, sought disclosure of what's called the Fujitsu known error log. Anyone with any familiarity with large-scale computer system will know that known error logs are routinely kept for computer systems for obvious reasons. The Post Office initially, by its solicitors, questioned whether the known error log existed at all, and then in formal submissions, the Post Office's leading counsel submitted to Mr. Justice Fraser that the request for the known error log was a red herring. In fact, when it was disclosed in 2019, it was considered by the judge to be the most important class of disclosure given in the entire litigation, and provided the answer to most of the technical issues that it was required to determine. My final point is this. The Court of Appeal, in what might be said to be in many respects an unsatisfactory and seriously incomplete judgment, quashed those 39 convictions. It made this observation: by representing Horizon as reliable and refusing to countenance any suggestion to the contrary, the Post Office effectively sought to reverse the burden of proof. It treated what was no more than a shortfall shown by an unreliable accounting system as an incontrovertible loss, and proceeded as if it were for the accused to prove that no such loss had occurred. Denied any disclosure of material capable of undermining the prosecution case, defendants were inevitably unable to discharge that improper burden. I'll deal with this point. I'm probably running up against time. I'll deal with this point. Well, okay, but I'll deal with this one in a very short period because it is of utterly fundamental, if that's not tautology, it's of fundamental importance. The reversal of the burden of proof point is very, very important. You'll have seen it from Lee Castleton's case and Seema Misra's case. They couldn't effectively get to the first hurdle, but it wasn't caused by the Post Office. The problem arises in 1997 when the Law Commission provided a report to Parliament recommending the abolition of section 69(1)(b) of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. That provided that in circumstances where a party wished to adduce evidence from a computer, which is otherwise technically for lawyers hearsay evidence, it was required to show that the computer was working reliably at the material time. The Law Commission and many others considered this to be burdensome and costly. And the Post Office and the Law Commission recommended to Parliament that it should be abolished because it served no, quotes, no useful purpose. You will see that in the Law Commission report. It was abolished under the Youth and Criminal Evidence Act, 2001, I think. Anyway, it was repealed. That provision was repealed. So the default position is that computer evidence, which is hearsay evidence, is treated as true unless it can be shown that there is some basis for that presumption not applying. Now, the problem with that in practice, and I'll just give the short vignette on it.
Short vignette.
Yeah, I'll shut up now. But the problem with that in practice is that at Mrs. Misra's trial, the Post Office's position was this, in effect: Mrs. Misra, you say there may be a problem with the Horizon computer system. Just tell us what the problem that you think there is was, and we will give you disclosure, any amount of disclosure you like about that. But what we're not going to do is give you disclosure generally. And of course, she didn't know what the problem was. She didn't think she had a problem with Horizon. All she knew was that she had unexplained and impossible to account for shortfalls on her accounts. That's all she knew. And she was effectively taunted by the prosecution at her trial for being unable to point to any actual problem she had with the computer system. And that's how it works in practice. And she went to prison because of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just to kind of point out that what you finished with is the situation in England and Wales in terms of presumptions around the functioning of computer systems.
It is at the moment, and there is some move to look at the position, but it is the position at the moment, and it's pernicious. Yes.
Thanks very much. We'll move now to Andrew.
Stand up.
You can stand up. Oh, so can people hear okay?
Yes, yes. So the inner lecture and I just couldn't go sit down. Well, thank you for coming. It's nice to be in Dundee again. I'm Andrew, and I suppose I have 3/4 of me are academic for these purposes, and about 1/4 is more journalistic or writerly. So I have 2 hats at least, or 2 wigs, I suppose is more legally appropriate. In terms of the academic side of things, my main interest in this comes from miscarriages of justice that I teach a course on miscarriages of justice and the manifold factors we know can give rise to them. Anyone who's a fan of Netflix will probably reel them off for me about the main factors. Particularly Americanized, you think about false confessions, for example, you think about lying witnesses, you think about tunnel vision from dishonest or intellectually confused police officers. If you read the roll call of things that cause wrongful convictions, you do not see technology on the list, almost never. It doesn't feature in the canon of these cases. And therefore, with the Post Office scandal, you immediately think, okay, we need to think about technology as a leading potential cause of wrongful convictions. And I think it's one of the most startling examples of this. And I think both academically and with a more journalistic hat on, I am stunned that this story has not gripped the public imagination more profoundly. Stunned. In the sense, we have a bunch of blameless, upright citizens with whom I would have thought it would be easy to identify with their predicament. There, but for the grace of God, go I, applies to this scandal more than any other dictum. And yet, the media seems, for the main part, very wonderful exceptions with Computer Weekly and Private Eye, relatively uninterested in this story. And that interests me and was what really drew me into it. So I was interested in this for those two reasons, really. What does this tell us about miscarriages of justice? How does it elaborate our understanding of what a miscarriage of justice looks like and why they happen? And secondly, really from a public point of view, particularly with the focus on Scotland, what do we know about what happened here? This is a UK-wide scandal, and yet if you follow the Scottish newspapers, yes, there's been some reporting about particular moments and episodes when Sir Wyn Williams, who's conducting his inquiry, came to Scotland. There was a few cursory notes, but his inquiry took place over 2 days. I went along pretending to be a journalist. There was someone from the Times there, a very, very, very junior baby reporter, and one other press person there, but otherwise, all of these stories that were being told by these people from Scotland, from Auchtermuchty to Inverness, from Greenock and Glasgow, people didn't really seem to give a damn about them. So I think there's a couple of things I want to say, I suppose. The first thing is, in terms of infallibility you were talking about, the assumptions or the difficulties of challenging this evidence. The Post Office Horizon scandal reminded me of what we've heard in some other contexts. We know, for example, in false confession cases, that Richard Leo, the American scholar, has said that a false confession poisons everything, right? It poisons everything. If the police get a false confession out of somebody, then very often prosecutors, the jury, forget about all the facts that don't really fit with it. It poisons everything because you say, well, sure, the false confession doesn't really fit the injuries in the victim. Sure, the deposition site is slightly different. Sure, the evidence about what the victim was wearing has changed. But look, we have a confession. Must have done it. Similarly, you find in the context of DNA mistakes, we have secondary transfer of DNA, which results in the implication of people in crimes they have not committed, a similar dynamic. Well, what about the DNA evidence? How do you explain that away? And it seems to me that what you see in this context, although the issues with Horizon are quite different, is something which is quite similar, which is what happens when we have a piece of evidence which the criminal justice system or those in it treat as incapable of being wrong. Think about fingerprinting evidence in the case of Shirley McKee, for example, where the judgment, the error that was made about her finger, caused an international scandal about fingerprinting. So I think that's the first thing I think. It has echoes of what we can see across the miscarriage of justice sphere about the factors which cause it. In terms of the Scottish situation, I just want to say a wee bit about that. What do we know about what's happening in Scotland? And the answer is not all that much. Not all that much. When Sir Wyn Williams came up to Scotland to do his human impact hearings in Scotland, we heard from postmasters from all the different places that I've mentioned already who talked about their experiences at the hands of the post office. But interestingly, to me, none of these people had been prosecuted in Scotland with any crime. They'd been accused, they'd handed over money, their lives had been wrecked, but they'd not been prosecuted. So they don't fall into classic understandings of miscarriages of justice, which assume we're talking about the wrongful conviction of the factually innocent. So that's interesting. We don't know how many people in Scotland were prosecuted using Horizon. We know, according to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, that they've written to 73 people. We don't know how they identified those 73 people. The Crown Office will not tell me how many people they may have prosecuted as being sub-postmasters over this period of time on the grounds that it's too expensive. We know that the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission is currently looking at 8 cases which may well have relied on Horizon, and they will give rise to appeal court proceedings in the criminal courts in Scotland about that, 8 out of 73. But we don't know about the other people. And we don't know the full extent of those folk that were never prosecuted for any type of dishonesty, theft or false accounting in Scotland. We do know one thing, however, which I think is important for this I will finish. We do know that in Scotland, unlike England and Wales, the Post Office could not act as a private prosecutor. We know that for any of these men and women to find themselves in front of the criminal courts in Scotland, a report would have to be made to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service by the Post Office, presumably, who would then have to act on that evidence. If you know that you are handing over false evidence, incomplete evidence to a state prosecutor, if you withhold that evidence in the hopes of your employees getting prosecuted successfully, there is a name for that. There's a name in the criminal law for that. It's attempting to pervert the course of justice. And therefore, I think in Scotland, we have the benefit of Sir Win Williams' inquiry, but we also have a Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, which I think should be interested in whether or not the Post Office and anyone in that organisation at the time lied to them with a view of them prosecuting their postmasters, because we know there are at least some of them. And thus far, in terms of my modest attempts to engage the Crown Office in this, or their public statements, well, what public statements? There aren't any. There aren't any. So there is a distinctive Scottish angle to this story, which I think is worth pursuing and worth exploring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. James.
Yes, Andrew was stunned. I'm here because I'm angry, and the reason I'm angry is because of my professional experience in IT. I have worked in many areas that are relevant to this. I've worked as a developer, I've worked as a system analyst, a business analyst, but the areas that are particularly relevant are, I've been a system designer, I've been an IT auditor, I've been an information security manager, and I've been a software test manager. And I've done that mainly in financial services and also with IBM on big outsourcing contracts, very similar to the Fujitsu contract with the Post Office. So I've seen how the job can be done properly. And I know that the Post Office and Fujitsu were disgracefully incompetent. I know what it's like to work with complex financial systems. I've built them, I've tested them, I've audited them. I've worked as the technical lead on fraud investigations that result in people doing jail time. So I've seen how these jobs should be done, and I know that it was done disgracefully over decades at the Post Office and Fujitsu. People outside IT often don't grasp the nature of large, complex software systems. These systems run permanently in a flawed state, but they can still be valuable nevertheless, depending on the business purposes they're used for, provided that they're managed by responsible, right people. Conversely, the components of a complex system can all work as designed. They can have been built perfectly according to the spec, but they can combine in unpredictable ways that lead to disastrous results. And the traditional response of that from us in IT has been blame the users. There was a reference to that in the cast of the judgment. The computer the arithmetic must have been right. It was obviously the user. And I think this is something that I'm straying into Rachel's territory, I think, here, but this is something that really makes me quite angry. People don't grasp the nature of these systems. Judges certainly haven't. When I've been explaining what these systems are like, I've used the analogy of a calculator to explain that complex systems are not, excuse me, they're not like large scaled up versions of simple mechanical instruments. They're a fundamentally different beast. And I was appalled when I was reading the witness statements provided by the Post Office. And it would presumably have been carefully checked, vetted and lawyered. And the statement compared Horizon to a calculator. And that was a statement of staggering idiocy. That is exactly what it is not. It's just a large complex software system is not, you cannot assume it is always predictable. It will surprise you. Something that people have to grasp is that perfection with these systems is impossible. You have to do the best that you can. Something will always go wrong, and it'll go wrong in ways that you can't even imagine. And that poses a massive challenge for everyone who's working with it. How do you respond to that? You've got to make sure that the IT service is managed tightly and you provide evidence to show that you've done that. And when you're building the systems, you have to ensure that there are appropriate controls embedded throughout the system to make sure that the right things always happen, the wrong things never happen, and if something unexpected happens, that the users and the system support staff are warned quickly enough for them to act before anyone gets hurt. What you cannot do is just assume everything's perfect because it's who said so. So, in order, if you're going to manage these systems responsibly, you need evidence. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Evidence that the service is managed properly and evidence that the system was working recently. This is where you need good auditors, and this is what I did. Doing a system audit for a complex software system is extremely difficult. You need very good people. It's a completely different job from auditing financial statements. And one of the things that the system auditors have to try and establish is whether the system has processing integrity. And that sounds like a vague, woolly platitude, but it's a precisely defined term in auditing standards. There's a set of criteria that a system has to comply with if it's to demonstrate processing integrity. There's no evidence at all that the Post Office conducted a rigorous system audit of Horizon. In fact, there's evidence, as Paul knows, that they fought against such a system audit because, and this was in a written document, the ISBE report, the reason they did not want the system to be audited was they thought that it might expose problems that would weaken confidence in the system. Well, I worked as an IT auditor, and it was their job to tell the senior management, the executives, the board, about the risks that should be keeping them awake at night. We wanted to weaken confidence where it was unjustified. As I say, there was an endless stream of warning signs, obvious public warning signs that should have sent the Post Office internal auditors into action. When it hit the press, is that me? No. When it hit the press, the auditors were steaming in to perform a system audit. They sat in their hands, they ignored the problems, they took their generous salaries and they evaded their responsibilities. As far as I'm concerned, it was a disgraceful evasion of responsibility. The things I've been talking about processing integrity, you could say, well, this might be a relatively new concept. It didn't apply when Horizon was being developed or in the early years. The standard I've referred to is relatively new, but the standard was not dictated from on high as a theoretical construct. It was a codified form of the way that IT auditors had been working for decades. People took this approach to establishing processing integrity back in the 80s. IT auditors were doing this before some of the people on this panel were born. The Post Office had got no excuse for not doing their job properly. The internal auditors failed to do their job. I don't believe that Horizon was uniquely flawed. There are any number of flaky corporate IT systems out there, but they're being managed by competent, responsible people. And that was what was missing at the Post Office in Fujitsu. Senior management and the board at both corporations abdicated their professional responsibility. That was disgraceful. That's why I am angry, and I think that that's unforgivable, and they should be held to account for it.
Thank you. Rachel, there seems to be a theme of standing up. Right, so I'm Rachel Menzies. I'm a senior lecturer in computing here at the university. And one of the things that I kind of find myself interested in is how people make use of technology and how people, how does technology shape society? Because that's the direction society is heading. It's what you can see is technology drives things, right? Now, I first heard of Horizon 2020, well, Horizon in 2020, that glorious summer where we all just went outside and walked around and listened to podcasts for months on end. I listened to podcasts on the Post Office Horizon. And what really got me was that this personal aspect had been missed. And a lot of the work that I do is around case studies, around people with specific disabilities that you can't generalise. So for me, my interest really starts at that very beginning of the social history aspect of people and how it affected the individual in that case. And as I got to know them on my walks around the fields, the professional interest grew. And then I started wondering, well, what is this system? And I went and looked it up. And all of the podcasts were around, well, is it a good system? Is it robust? Is it accurate? Is it reliable? And there was this belief in the popular press that for a system to be good, it must be accurate. And that's not the definition of a good system at all.
The definition of a good system is whether it fails gracefully, right? So do you want a Facebook where you post something on your Facebook feed and everyone else sees something different? No. If that's going to happen, Facebook should tell you, there's a problem here, let's go again. In effect, a lot of the things that were happening in Horizon were that what one person could see, another person couldn't. So if you follow along this line of what's accurate, you end up with this really big view of impact. You end up with this view that you measure impact of a software system on the number of people, the amount of money, the amount of time that you save, and everything is very business focused. And you see this repeatedly through time. And I've got a few examples of situations where I think, you know, the focus here in the press in particular has been around the big impact of this technology, and you've lost sight of the little guy. So 2014, the National Air Traffic Control had a major wobble, shall we call it. Planes were grounded all over, and all the press could report, all that was reported in IT circles was the impact on the economy. But what was never reported was the lady who travelled to see her dying father and didn't make it on time. The closest parallel I can find of this sort of miscarriage where someone dies without their name being cleared. You remember the RAF Chinook that flew over Mull of Kintyre? All 29 people died, including 2 pilots. Those 2 pilots blamed for that. And at their funeral, they were the people who killed the other 27 people. You can't have another funeral. And that was a software error. So when you bring it down to these smaller numbers of people that are affected, you start to see the real societal cost of what we see here in the post office. It's not about this big behemoth. It's about the individual people, and that's where I'm particularly interested in. It's the impact of this drive of society to say technology is better, we can do that. Technology does this, that, and the other, and that's the way we're going to go. But we've lost perspective a little bit because we're being driven by the technology. And as a computing scientist, that's the thing I say, don't absolutely ever do that. And the first question any student who comes is, I've got this great thing. Why? Do you need it? Will you use it? All of these questions. Now, obviously, the Horizon system had a clear purpose, right? It had a clear direction. Some of the bugs in there were, from a professional point of view, just laughable. You know, and I don't say that flippantly. I mean, some of the bugs that occurred were things that you teach in primary school and high school that shouldn't happen. That you would have an interface that froze, and if I kept pressing the button, it would kept, you know, transferring money, but I was never told. You know, it didn't fail gracefully. And that's the point behind all of this, that the design of the system was poor. And because the design of the system was poor, coupled by, you know, the argument of who's in charge of it, the whole thing fell apart. But what I think we need to learn from this is that we need developers that go out into the world that can take ownership, and ownership of bugs should be given to developers, not the business. How many people in the Horizon cases reported bugs and were told that's a business issue, go and speak to this person, or they were told, oh, we only deal with such and such a thing, if it's about money, it's a finance issue, go over there. No one in the IT help desk was taking ownership of the issues. And that was the first hurdle when it all started to unravel. So whether it's we create socially aware developers that understand the impact of the systems that they create, it's not just about technology for technology's sake. The role of people in the know now to go out into society and provide education for people about technology, what technology can and can't do. Rule number 1, it's probably not your fault, even if you think it is. Right? This is the thing that we have to teach people to trust themselves with technology and not to put all the trust in technology. So that's kind of the angle that I'm coming from tonight, is about that perspective and just looking at the societal impact rather than the business side of things.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to the panel. I think well, it's in a short space of time, but thanks everyone for keeping to time, more or less. So, I mean, I wanted to have like a good amount of time for questions and discussion, and hopefully we'll hear from the panelists again. How are things going online? How we...
Yeah, speaking of some technical problems, everyone I think can see us and hear us fine, but in order to ask questions, the chat function and Q&A isn't working as it should. However, I've sent everyone an email, so we've got a backup option. So if anyone online is watching, you can reply to the email that came from event, and that will come to us here, so we can ask the question. And I've sent everyone an updated email with the details on that, so we can take them via email, but not via the chat.
Oh, sorry everyone for our clunky IT. I guess it shows IT is not perfect, which is very much the theme of today. But in that case, audience here, do you have questions, comments? The gentleman here.
Yeah. No, really fascinating stuff, but I'm trying to think about the learning points from that whole sort of experience. And it strikes me it's something to do with this over-reliance on technology as being the answer and not listening to people. You know, lots of people will tell me about how they're phoning Scottish Gas or something or other, and they're just getting the same sort of person who's not got control over the system, and they're just telling them what the system is seeing. It's just having, go back 30 years ago, you'd phone someone and they would make it change, but now it's phoning someone and it's saying, this is the technology saying that, so we can't really alter that. But it's just trying to see whether there's a learning point about some sort of higher authority that's just taking into account of the technology as well as what the small person is saying to you, whether it's a post office person or someone, a pensioner struggling with a fuel bill or whatever it might be. And I just wonder if there's something in that space about learning points, about creating something in society that allows other people's voices to be heard and acted on.
I think raised a very interesting issue in the sense that I hope you might put this right. I mean, one of the things that you're talking about is a sense the disjunct between control on the one hand and responsibility or liability, as it was in the post office, on the other. And it seems to me that that's a really interesting and very difficult question, because I was going to unpack this originally, but I'll give it now as an example, because I think I hope it illustrates the point that you're making, that Fujitsu was the provider of the computer system to the post office. It was an enormously widely distributed system. It's a technical system, and it was known at the time that it was rolled out to be unreliable. The government ministers, cabinet ministers, had told Parliament in 1999 that if they insisted on running the state benefits system through the post offices through Horizon, they risked a fiasco. So the government didn't do that, and it provided to provide effectively an accounting tool. Now, knowing of the problem, the post office got presumably quite high-priced legal help to draft contracts, which transferred the commercial risk in the system to its postmasters. They had a contractual liability to make up out of their own money any shortfalls in the system. So the start point was, if you're a postmaster and you've got a shortfall in your system, you've got to pay. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, that's so remote, but that's an extraordinary situation. They didn't know that they were taking on this responsibility. But the really interesting thing about this is that right up until the conclusion, well, I say the conclusion of the litigation, the civil litigation, the group litigation brought by 550 people, an issue that had arisen in 2013 was the allegation that the post office and Fujitsu could and did remotely access postmaster accounts. In 1999, eventually the post office conceded what it had publicly denied and denied in court. It was possible, and the evidence to Mr. Justice Fraser was not only it was possible, but it was routinely done without records being kept of it in the early years of Horizon. So anyone prosecuted in the early years of Horizon would have had available to them defence that, well, you can't show that you didn't manipulate my account, and that's the occasion for the shortfall. So what you have here, and that's really by way of a sort of high level view of it, but what you have is the mismatch between the incidence of liability on the one hand and control of the system on the other. And a different way of looking at it is the way in which software is produced and updated by large complex systems, and that's a really fundamental problem, because we have a commercial and certainly legally a conception of liability and control which is derived from effectively largely 19th century case law. It's wholly inappropriate to complicated, widely distributed technical systems of the kind we're talking about. So it's a big problem, and it's really the issue that lies behind a lot of this, which.
Gentleman at the front.
Yeah, it's not, well, it is to do with technology. I used to be an audit manager for the post office pre-Horizon, and I had a great deal of empathy with sub-postmasters, because all they were trying to do was serve the local community and be a pillar of that community. And like yourself, I am very, very angry. Yes, I used to cover basically the whole of Yorkshire. And if we found 12, 15 people in a year in the whole of Yorkshire fiddling, for want of a better word, that was it. So what makes me so angry is, why was nobody, when they were almost carte blanche prosecuting people, not looking back and saying, whoa, just a minute, why are we getting, you know, hundreds in a matter of a year, when before Horizon we were getting 15 in one area? And it just annoys me so much when it was a paper system, and yes, it was bulky and time consuming, but you'd got an audit record in the office, go back easily and see where a potential mistake had been made. There was also the secondary check at what was called PhD in Chesterfield, where all the paper stuff was sent. If an office had reported a large deficit, they were the first lot that they checked. And more often than not, they came back. Whereas from what I've read in Nick Wallace's book, which I would recommend to anybody, like you say, when they went to Horizon, they didn't bother checking it, because the people who were checking it were at such low level, who had such lack of knowledge about the system. You know, they were just palming people off, and it just makes me so angry. And the thing that makes me the angriest of all, with the fact that the chairman all the way through this was Paula Venables, who had a reputation being a, you know, she had various places on boards of charities, but above all, she was a lay preacher, you know, supposed Christian, and she was overseeing this, and she just turned a blind eye to it. How can the woman live with herself? It really hurts me.
Yeah, I was amazed at the way the post office conducted the fraud investigations. So I've worked on fraud investigations, and the idea that you'd simply accept figures that you saw from the computer as evidence of fraud was ridiculous. I was compiling evidence for prosecution, for investigations and then prosecution. I was putting it together from various sources, making sure that everything was consistent and double checked. The only time I've ever lost sleep in my work was when I lay awake at night knowing the Lancashire police were going to be raiding 13 houses at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was thinking, did I get everything right? Did I check everything? And it was fine, because everyone pleaded guilty. but we could not simply assume that the systems were correct. We knew that the data we were working with had integrity because we'd audited these systems. We'd established that they were okay. They were good enough for the purposes that we required. And that, if you're prosecuting on the basis of that evidence, you have to be very confident in the system. It might not be totally accurate for all purposes, but you have to be confident very confident in your data for the purposes of a fraud investigation. And the Post Office were just so cavalier. The people who were conducting these investigations were miles out of their depth, and they didn't even realise it.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I don't want to hog it, but I'm fuming, about the whole thing. But the POID, when the cases you're talking about, the investigation department went straight in. When I was doing it, you didn't get, say we found somebody X amount short. The POID weren't following us in our footsteps. It was weeks. They did lots of checks before the POID went in and started their investigation.
That was the way we worked too. The suspect would never be spoken to. We've done all the meticulous technical investigation.
It was just morally wrong. I'll never forgive them.
Yeah, one of the guys in the Scottish Inquiry was a guy from London originally, who was up in Inverness, and he had a confrontation with citizen now and gives evidence of this human impact process. And he testified to Sir Wyn Williams that these two guys had turned up, told him they had the same power as the police. Not true in Scotland. Didn't give him a scrap of paper. Told him effectively, if you pay us several £1,000s in the next hour or two, then we'll go away and nothing bad will happen. So this guy, who has two young kids he looks after for himself, goes out on his evidence to find money, which he then seems to turn over to these two guys and then is promptly dismissed for gross misconduct. And I was sitting there listening to this and just thinking, so no due process, no formal allegation, no presentation of any specific evidence against it, just what looks like threats and menaces. I mean, if I did that, I would get convicted of extortion, and I just thought it was remarkable. But of course, it goes back to the thing about, are you in a position meaningfully to resist? And if lawyers aren't in a position meaningfully to cross-examine, if they don't understand what's going on, or if you're someone just facing effectively threats and menaces and a demand, then you're just not meaningfully in a position to defend yourself. And I think that's all through those human impact sessions. I see none of these people have been convicted, but all of them felt that acute psychological pressure, including one of them. Just an example from Lenzie, a young woman who was, I think it was in 2016 or so, well into a degree of public awareness about this, who, when the lady arrived to set up Horizon in her new post office in Lenzie, where she was from, and which meant a lot to her, and her parents were there, she had a shop there already. And day one, hour one, no customers in yet. Oh, you're £970 short. £970 short. And she said, "Did you take that?" Take it from where? Take it from where?
Well, even the trainers weren't trained. They'd got no idea what they were doing.
And you know what she did though? She paid it back because she thought, in the grand scheme, it'll come out in the wash. It's the modern equivalent of £2 short, £5 short, and it didn't. It never did.
And it's that trust in technology, though. Even when deep down you know it's wrong, the human psyche still trusts technology over even yourself. Sometimes people trust technology more than they trust their GP.
Sometimes we're very
Honestly, people will be much more honest with a chatbot than they will with the GP sitting in front of them, because they trust this abstract entity that it will all somehow be okay.
But there is some evidence
That includes judges.
Just add one last thing, sorry. The duplicity of the sub-postmasters trade union, the NSFP. They were conned into by the post office. They wouldn't back up the sub-postmasters at all.
They were bought, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were bought. They were funded by the post office.
Their executive committee.
Ones as a result of that.
Oh no, nothing wrong with it. And that's their trade union. Right, I've shut up now.
There's a gentleman behind you.
I find the technical IT aspect of this fascinating, but human behaviour is something that always interests me more than that. And it's the way, as you've described, humans control the technology. And I like finding analogies. And I go back to when I came to Dundee in 1969, there was a programme called Monty Python's Flying Circus, who invented a protection racket called the Piranha Brothers. And I happen to believe, sitting here, that what the post office have been doing is a corporate protection racket using all the methods that protection rackets use of lying, distortion, extortion, and what in particular they seem to have done is because they realise their legal case is so shaky. I believe the Latin expression here is ad hominem. They have played the judge in one case where they tried to have the judge recused, which I understand is a very unusual action to take.
Bold, rarely successful.
And as I'm on that Latin kick, prima facie, it appears to me that they realise that their case is so poor, but it's such a damage to their corporate reputation, they cannot afford to lose it. Therefore, they are also corporate anarchists. Anarchists used to have the slogan, by any means necessary. It seems to me, having followed this for about 7 or 8 years, and that's relatively new, how long this has gone on, and it is outrageous that it doesn't get more attention. But how do we do it? We have meetings like this, draw attention to it. We have the interview in the Courier, which is why I'm here today. But it's just, it's so unacceptable. And again, as the gentleman in front of me has said, it's a moral issue. It's not just legal or technological. It's how we behave towards other people who are unfairly and unjustly treated. And no wonder you're angry, because more people should be. I rest my case.
Just add one observation to that, which I think comes on your last point, really. That the common feature of almost all those who suffered at the hands of the post office were people who I would describe as being people of limited agency within the justice system. That is to say, people of limited means and resources, and therefore unable to meet satisfactorily the resources and in effect the main power that the post office deployed against them. The example I've already given of that is Lee Castleton in 2006. He'd run out of money. He told me he spent about £60,000 defending himself. He'd run out of money. He couldn't afford anything more. This was on a £26,000 claim. The solicitor of Bond Pierce, the name of the firm at the time, later became somebody who acted for the post office in 2019. The solicitor who was representing the post office said, if you defend this claim, we will ruin you. They got an order for costs against Lee Castleton for £321,000. He continues to have trustee in bankruptcy, even now, despite the fact he was a member of the group litigation in 2019. Yeah, these people who are disadvantaged in the criminal justice system, in the justice system, his was a civil case, obviously, but in the justice system generally, this would not have happened if there'd have been any kind of parity between the resources available to the postmasters and the post office, because you only the kind of arguments that were run in the civil litigation in the first trial, it was called the common issues trial. One of the issues that arose was the contractual obligation of a postmaster to make good shortfalls was based on a legal proposition, which is an account stated. So if I tell you what I owe you, formally, contractually, as it was in that case, that puts the burden on you to show why that was wrong. Now, Mr. Justice Fraser in the Common Issues judgment says that this is wrong on analysis, because in fact it wasn't an account stated because there was no agreement. It was something which they involuntarily had to accept. If they wanted to keep their post office running, they had to state the account, which placed the burden theoretically on the postmaster. Now that was wrong. Now no postmaster, simply no postmaster, would have been in a position to obtain legal assistance of the kind that needed to unpick that contract for them.
I think we've got a question or two online.
Yeah, we've got one that's come in. So the question is, as Paul Marshall's mentioned the spell test. And did anyone at Post Office Limited ever stand back and ask themselves a simple question: is this right? That's the rhetorical question, I think, because we all know the answer.
Yeah, no, I well, yeah, I mean, this derives from the Neville Owen, who was the Australian judge who conducted the HIH insurance collapse inquiry at the end of the 20th century, which is the biggest corporate collapse. And he said after in Australian history at the time, he said in the Royal Commission, he said in his report that the thing that has occurred to me when hearing days and days of evidence about what happened is nobody at any stage just stand back and ask themselves the question, is this right? And if more management in the post office had done this and more lawyers for the post office had done this, we wouldn't be where we are today. Comes back to your point, I think.
Just so I'm a civil lawyer, so I'm not a criminal lawyer, but
so am I. I'm not a criminal.
And so I'm interested in the kind of challenging the evidence and the best way of doing that, because one of the things it seems, and I don't know a great deal about the topic generally, as much as other people have not read books on it and so on, but it seems that there's perhaps been some bad actors, and there's been a number of different things. These are problems in the systems, maybe not designed very well, if it had been audited properly, if other people, when they were deciding to prosecute, had thought about those things and looked at them, or perhaps they did and then they didn't act upon that. Like, we wouldn't have ended up quite where we are. There must be in other organisations, other situations, like how can we guard against this kind of thing happening again, even if it's not necessarily on this scale, because as Rachel was saying, perhaps the one person is still devastating for that one person. So, how best do we go about challenging that? Do we demand audit certificates? But perhaps audit certificates would have been produced, but auditors didn't do their job right. Would we do other things? How kind of evidentially would we do that without spending tens of thousands of pounds on IT experts?
And if I can add, so what about the common platform? That's the name of the system in England and Wales in the justice system that some are raising concerns about, that is causing another IT system causing errors, that is potentially putting justice at risk. So, are we seeing more and more, or have we learned the lessons from the post office, especially when we've got other systems like this potentially being put in place?
Well, firstly, to answer your question, how can we stop this happening again? I think the first thing is it won't happen again. Certainly not in this way. One of the most remarkable features of the post office thing is that it was a private prosecutor. So it was acting as victim, investigator and prosecutor, and then subsequently a fourth hat it was wearing in the appeals as the respondent to an appeal. That will never happen again. One of the things that I find very interesting about the Scottish position is that there's obviously been a requirement to go to the Procurator's Fiscal Office in contemplation of prosecution. Now, there was never any such independent check in the English position in the courts of England and Wales, because the Post Office, for historic reasons, which are very well entrenched, was able to bring the prosecution. So everything was in-house. The other thing is, again, I can't remember who made the observation, but the fundamental importance to this entire story is that between 2010 and 2013, the Post Office recognised that it had a major ocean-going copper bottom problem with Horizon. To cut a long story short, the consequence of that was that, in my view, it recognised that the full scale of that problem amounted to this: in short, if it accepted that Horizon was unreliable and bug-ridden, the effect of that, the implication would be that it couldn't tell the difference between fraud and a technical error. If that happened commercially, that would have brought down the entire post office business model. So that provided an imperative, a commercial imperative, to use a provocative expression, to cover it up. Because if it was, the post office couldn't replace it, I think it was down to about 11,000 Horizon terminals in a short frame of time frame. So it took the decision, how it took the decision, but it did take the decision, and I could unpack that, to basically close down. One of the ways it did that was it sacked Second Sight, who were independent forensic accountants who were reviewing the system. Second Sight said, we want to see the prosecution files because we don't think they stack up to a row of beans in a select committee. Within 6 weeks, they were sacked, and nothing further was heard about any of this until 2019, the civil litigation. On the criminal platform, but on the criminal platform, there's recently been quite a lot of excitement in England in that the computer system, new computer platform that's been introduced by the criminal court, has been widely rolled out, has been shown to, surprisingly enough, lose files, lose records of convictions, etc., which is causing consternation and upset. Now, I may be wrong, I'll be corrected, but I think the system is provided by Fujitsu. And the odd thing, one of the odd things in all of this is a chap called Tim Parker was appointed chair of the post office, I think I'm right in saying, in 2016. He's also chair of Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal, His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. It's extraordinary.
On the specific point of audit certificates, yes, I think there should be some form of regulation like that. If somebody's producing evidence for the court, they should be able to demonstrate that they've managed the system responsibly and that it has been audited appropriately.
Go back from, because that's the management processes. But in the development of software, I think you need to celebrate bugs more. Bugs are viewed as a negative thing. And there's a great story of a guy in Google who they said to him, there's this team over here, software's not working. You know, why don't you go over there and see if you can fix it? It will be great for your kind of, you know, visibility in the organisations. He truly went, moved team, found loads of bugs, solved all the bugs, but didn't get promoted because his team registered too many bugs. How can you ever say that you want to improve a system if you never respect that it has a bug to start with?
When you're developing mind-bogglingly complex systems and you don't really know what you're doing or what the system is doing, you can regard bugs as the gap between what you expect and what the system's doing. And discovering a bug is good news because you've learned something about the system. And that's a much more positive way to look at bugs.
But isn't it interesting that sort of how much public consciousness there is? Whenever I talk to folk who work in computing, they talk in just the way you're talking about systems, errors. Whereas I do think in terms of the wider public understanding of this, there's a book I read years ago, I think it's called Law Goes Pop, which is about law and popular culture in America. And it talked about the CSI effect, you know, that American viewers are quite disappointed by the realities of CSI evidence. They're expecting, you know, to see where the bullet left the body and all of that. And I do wonder if that's not what we have to think about, which is what is the level of social literacy about the capacity for error of a bunch of different things. Whether it is, you know, people give false confessions. It might strike you as strange, but we know they do, and there's lots of psychological evidence why. You know, similarly, DNA evidence is not case closed, job done. There's plenty of reasons, and human factors. The wrong fingerprinting, I mentioned the Shirley McKee case, which you might remember, where you know, the world had a very stark example for those, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this case, but where a police officer's fingerprint was found inside a house where a murder was committed. She denied categorically that she'd been there. The Scottish Fingerprinting Service said it's definitely her. Wasn't her. Wasn't her. It was a complete mistake because it's a human factor. And I wonder whether from a kind of wider social response, maybe we do need to understand more. This is your point, isn't it? That these are human systems and anything built by human hands is bound to be faulty somewhere.
Break at some point.
Yeah.
I think software testers are amongst the more thoughtful people in IT. And whenever we're speaking public, we try to get in a reference to Gerald Weinberg, who's a great American thinker, tester. Sadly, he died a few years ago, but he's been very influential among software testers, and he wrote a book called Perfect Software and Other Illusions. But one of his lessons that we always try to drum into young testers is, whatever it was a Weinberg quote, whatever it looks like, it's always a people problem.
I think we've got another question or point online.
Yeah, we do. Why did Horizon need to be so complicated? What is the role of DevOps in auditable data integrity? Is the failure to apply DevOps principles taken into account in judging whether there is data integrity?
None of those works.
Oh dear, yes, DevOps. Ensuring that print systems are built with the different experts working closely together. And it's not something with which I'm familiar, but the principles that the DevOps people follow are very closely aligned with the view of complex systems that I've been talking about, that they're extremely difficult to work with, and it's very difficult to predict how they'll behave. And you need to be very careful about how you do it, and to make sure that they're built in such a way that people can use them safely, so that people can, the systems are built to reveal errors and unexpected behaviour in time for them to be dealt with safely. I'm not really sure. There's so much mentioned in that question. I'm not really sure how to respond. You could write a book and answer all the points.
I think the thing about DevOps is that it allows you to come, it's a fancy name for basically compartmentalizing different types of development. So you have lots of different bits of the system, you can update them in isolation. What you get with legacy systems is, in order to update that system, we have to have downtime of 3 days and we can't afford it. So we're going to wait until we really need to before we need that downtime. But what you find with DevOps is that it just little things change all of the time. And so it's constantly been able to be updated. And I think that the fact that there's all that legacy software in there plays a big role, because it's, although it's documented, it's not created in the way that we would create software now, because we would have much more of a the example I mentioned earlier where the interface freezes and you press the button and things still happen, like what you should have is some kind of, we call it a control module or something like that behind it, which would take that bit and take that bit and do all the, yep, that's all fine, and then confirm the transaction. But what it's trying to do is do everything in this one big space, and so you start this mentality of, is it worth it? Is it worth it to fix that thing?
I'll take Niamh, and if anyone, I'd say let's final questions. So maybe before we kind of finish the formal part, because it'll be informal time as well. So if anyone's got any kind of final-ish questions or points, let's do them now. So Niamh, you go.
So this is a question to the lawyers. Firstly, to reassure anyone in the audience who's living in Scotland, we don't have the common platform, computer platform, as they have in England and Wales. That's not to say we necessarily have better, but we don't have that. My question is about disclosure. So I do most of my work in a forensic context within the criminal courts, but I've also worked in public inquiries and in civil courts. within the criminal court, certainly in England and Wales, there is a huge importance placed on disclosure. So we as forensic experts have got an obligation to record, retrieve, etc., and retain our notes so that we can disclose them to the defence in good order and in good time. Do you see that this case, the Horizon case, will push the issue of disclosure within the civil courts to the sort of similar extent or degree or level that they are in the criminal?
Well, it ought to. But the remarkable thing about Horizon, from one point of view, certainly speaking as a civil lawyer, and in relation to Lee Castleton's case, which is the only reported decision in a civil context, the remarkable thing about it is that this information is and was available. The Fujitsu known error log existed. It was also in the control of the post office, so they were able to disclose it. And you have this utterly astonishing position in 2019 when the claimants, the 550 group claimants, wanted the known error log. And the first response of the post office by its solicitors was to question whether it existed. No question it existed. I mean, there were tens of thousands of records. Secondly, as I say, by leading counsel before Mr. Justice Fraser, they submitted that the request for it was a red herring. Now, these are documents which lay in a whole variety of locations that were utterly fundamental to the determination of the case. And the Post Office, by its leading counsel, submits that the request is a red herring. Obviously, it wasn't a red herring, utterly fundamental. Well, is there any comeback for that? I mean, that's, subject to explanations, one would say that's misleading of the court. And the third thing that was contended by the Post Office is when Mr. Justice Fraser, he accepted evidence that it existed. He accepted that it wasn't a red herring and it was relevant. The third line of defence was the Post Office said, well, it's not in our custody or possession, it's Fujitsu's. Now, this is a maintained system. It's a maintained, massively widely distributed system. At the time of its rollout in 1999, it was regarded and hailed as being the largest non-military computer system in Europe. And they're saying, well, we can't, this is a maintained system. What do you have with a maintained system? You have the supplier and the user contractually interested in the performance of the system, because otherwise it won't know what it's getting for its money. I mean, this is all just nonsense at one level of analysis. And it's extraordinary that in 2019, you're having Mr. Justice Fraser saying, I'm having the known error log here disclosed for the first time. It's been prosecuting up and down the country. Well, for 14 years. It stopped in 2014 because it recognised that Horizon was a basket case full of bugs. But this is the position that arises in 2019. With, in fact, James, a number of us have written some quite structured recommendations to the government at the invitation of the Ministry of Justice, actually, about how disclosure should work in this case. And our view is that there should be standard disclosure of known problems as a matter of routine. And that's because it's not difficult for a large computer operator to provide this, because it's held in a readily accessible and producible way. And only when when a party can provide evidence, I mean, this really goes back to the position of the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act, only when they can be demonstrated knowledge of the performance of the system should it be just accepted as what the Law Commission said it ought to be, namely in principle evidence of the facts stated, which is really obviously the purpose of evidence. And otherwise, if there are issues, then it ought to flag up whether the issues correspond or correlate with the kind of problems that are being alleged by a defendant. One of the really, really terrible things about, which reveals bad things or give rise to concern about the justice system more widely. One of the bad things in the Horizon prosecutions, this is Misra's trial, the judge invited the jury to consider the Post Office's evidence that millions of transactions were processed by Horizon every day without a problem. And here you've got Mrs. Misra polling up and saying that she's got a problem getting shortfalls, and there's £70,000, and that's what the arithmetic shows. Members of the jury, you may draw inferences. This is what the judge said. You may draw inferences from the number of transactions and the post office's evidence about that as to Mrs. Misra's evidence. Now, I'm sure a lot of you here will be familiar with a case called the tragic Sally Clark case, baby shaking cases some years ago, in which the expert of the prosecution said it was just completely inconceivable that this could have happened by accident. Well, in fact,
2 Grand Nationals, I think, was that the metaphor?
yeah, exactly. And it's exactly the same thing. And not only does it appear in first instance, as in Mrs. Misra's case, it also appears in the Court of Appeal. There's a Court of Appeal judgment dismissing one of the appeals prior to the successful 2021 appeals, in which the Court of Appeal records the Post Office's evidence that there were millions of transactions processed every day by Horizon, as if that's evidence of anything at all.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The Post Office's assertion that there wasn't a number wrong was, as far as I'm concerned, effectively an admission that the service was not being managed.
Yes.
And the court would have been entitled to say, well, in that case, you're admitting to being incompetent to the point of negligence, and neither you nor the court nor us can have any confidence in the integrity of the data, the processing end of the case.
I think the gentleman over here wants to say something.
Maybe a little bit of a naive question, but wasn't there at any point at the end of the year, closure of the books, an accountant that said like, oh, hang on, the numbers don't add up? Because
well,
the external auditors, who are Ernst & Young for the most part, they audited the system, but you've got to remember that they're assessing whether the accounts are true and fair, and they're looking at the high level statement.
very technocratic.
And the sort of money that was ruining people's lives was just rounding errors as far as the corporate accounts were concerned. They weren't clear. It wasn't these external auditors' job. There's a big story about to be told about whether they were negligent in assessing the internal control mechanisms of the post office. I think they were, but I don't think you can really blame them for failing to spot the errors in the financial statements, because they weren't significant. They were looking.
One last question from somebody who wants to, maybe somebody who hasn't spoken before, just to be a bit democratic. Sarah, I might go to the gentleman. Yeah, the gentleman can go. A quick question and quick answers, please.
Oh, yeah. There's so much material here. I mean, it seems. I apologise because I missed the beginning of it. But to start with, you made a point about bad actors, Mike, and it seems this to me there's been a bunch of lying and corruption going on super deep, and a lot of groupthink. You just can't admit to anything being wrong. It's just patently obvious, and systems being super complicated. I think you made a point about why aren't, or you did, why don't people question them more, and why isn't there more picked up in the media? And it makes me think that because systems are so bloody complicated that people don't understand them. So about complex finance systems, for example, I mean, a lot of stuff that we do our everyday banking on is still written on COBOL, from 40 years ago, maintained by people who are now even older than me and pensioned, and because they work, the systems work, and there's terror about changing them. And when you make things super complex, perhaps there should be some kind of licensing or black box type of arrangement where, especially on public types of systems, something goes wrong, alert, here it is, let's analyze it, much like when a plane crashes. Shouldn't there be some kind of equivalent like that?
I mean, I think that's a rhetorical question, but I will give the panel a very quick opportunity to say anything they'd like to.
Who knew what when and what did they do about it? Very good question. I mean, it's certainly worth highlighting that one of the women who gave evidence at the hearing points out the fact that it was after the big civil judgment against the post office that the then CEO of the organisation got her royal gong of some kind or the other afterwards, because it was in the January after the
CBE and appointed to the Cabinet Office.
Indeed. So I think there's the kind of dearth of responsibility is something which is yawning right in the middle of all of this. And it's one of these ones where there are so many contributing factors, you know, that could be an excellent way of avoiding
The human moral vacuum of personal responsibility is shocking.
Massive, and I think my own view is systemic ethical failure, both on the part of the post office and certainly arguably on the part of some of its lawyers.
On that note, I think I'm going to conclude this formal part, but there's still opportunity to speak, and there's so much to talk about, and I would like to give us all an opportunity to talk less formally, and over some refreshments. So I'm going to wind up the formal part, and I'm going to just thank the panel, or please join me in thanking the panel for a really good. Much the audience, both with me here in the room and also online, and apologies to the online audience that our own tech wasn't working as well as it could be, but I hope you still managed to see what we were talking, or hear what we were talking about, and participate in some way as well. I'd like to thank very much the Leverkusen Research Centre for Forensic Science and our public engagement team, Heather and Clara. Thank you so much. Thank again, Professor Niamh McDade, Graham Johnson, and Dr. Sarah Hendry for making the event possible. So thanks very much. Please enjoy, and yeah, thank you again for coming. Thanks very much.